Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to focus today on 180-day exclusivity. The original title of my talk was going to be Forfeiture of 180-day exclusivity, but then I realized most of my talk is going to focus on how do you qualify for a first filer exclusivity. Those that are not as familiar with the pharma cases in the US, the general idea is that when you file an abbreviated new drug application, what we call an ANDA application, that a generic applicant files in the United States, it's faster, it's cheaper because you do not have to do all of the studies that are required of the branded application, right? And one of the things that an ANDA applicant has to do is if the NDA holder, if the brand has listed one or more patents for that product, they have to decide how they want to address those patents. If there are no patents or the patents have expired, they do what's called a P1, P2 certification. If there are one or more patents listed, but the ANDA holder chooses to wait till the patents expire before they want to market their product, then they can do what's called a P3 certification. And then if there are one or more patents that the ANDA holder wants to challenge, meaning they're interested in getting into the market before those patents expire, because, they can do a P4 certification, basically challenging the patents because their product would not infringe those patents, or those patents are otherwise invalid or unenforceable. So that's the idea. I think the pharma folks know this already, but I want to make sure we're all on the same page here. One of the incentives in filing an ANDA application with a P4 certification under the Hatch-Waxman Act is the idea that you get 180-day exclusivity, right? So the Act encourages somebody to challenge patents in order to get generics in the market faster to the extent that the patents are weak and should not be protected all the way through their expiration date, right? And so that's how 180-day exclusivity comes about. The first filer that files an ANDA application for a given product with a P4 certification, meaning an intent to challenge those patents and take on that risk, would get 180-day exclusivity. If there are more than one filer that files on that same day, then they would share that 180-day exclusivity. So the idea would be that nobody else during those 180 days can sell that generic product except for obviously the brand, and then any generics that have first filer exclusivity. Now, there are different ways you can forfeit this exclusivity, which I'm not going to focus on for now. But what I'm going to focus on is the recent happenings about who qualifies as a first applicant, right? You would think we would have this figured out by now, but there are nuances that came about recently that have kind of changed things for many companies. So the FDA issued a letter decision in a Suboxone case a few months ago, mid-last year, July 2018. And this case is important. This letter decision is important because the FDA has kind of changed its view in many ways on who qualifies as a first applicant. Okay, so that was the focus of this decision. It also addressed one of the forfeiture provisions, failure to market, which I'm not going to cover today in the interest of time. So what are the facts of Suboxone? The facts are actually easy to understand. In May 2013, the first applicant, that kind of gives away the conclusion already, but the first applicant submitted a substantially complete ANDA with a P4 certification. Substantially complete, in layman's term, basically means when you submit an ANDA, the FDA kind of reviews it, see if it looks substantive on its face, has met all the requirements, kind of checklist requirements, and if it has, the FDA gives that ANDA applicant an acceptance for filing. That's not an approval, it just means that your application seems ready for a thorough review. That's called an acceptance for filing. So what happens here is the first applicant submits an ANDA with a P4 certification, and the application is substantially complete, meaning the FDA gave them an acceptance for filing. However, one of the other things required under the Act is that when you file a P4 certification, within 20 days, or if you amend at the same time, you have to give the brand a notice that you have filed an application with the FDA and you intend to challenge their patents, right? So that notice is required. What happens with this first applicant is while they file an application with a P4 certification, they don't send a notice. For reasons that are not relevant to us, they decide to withdraw their ANDA, so they never sent that notice that is required under the Act. The next applicant comes along and also files a substantially complete application, obviously on a different day. That's important, you'll see in a second, with the P4 certification. And this applicant actually submits a notice. And the question for the FDA is, who is the first applicant here? Okay. Now, it's a case of statutory interpretation in that the first applicant is defined as the first bullet point here. It says an applicant that on the first day on which a substantially complete application containing a paragraph 4 certification is submitted for approval of a drug, submits a substantially complete application, and lawfully maintains that P4 certification. That's a lot to kind of digest, but the idea is that there are 3 prongs. I don't know how that bullet point moved further up. So there are 3 prongs. When? On the first day on which a substantially complete ANDA is submitted, okay? And then submit, you have to submit it, and it has to be substantially complete, and then lawfully maintain means not only does it have to contain a P4 certification, you have to maintain that P4 certification, okay? So the question for the FDA is here, is a notice required in order for the person to be qualified as a first applicant? The FDA first reviews what had been the law up until that time, including the FDA's interpretation, which was the first effective approach. In a nutshell, the first effective approach is that, look, you not only have to submit a substantially complete ANDA on that day with a P4 certification, but then you have to perfect it. That's my word. You have to perfect it, make it effective by sending a notice. Okay? That was the first effective approach. And so if you use the first effective approach under the facts of this case, the first applicant did not make their ANDA application effective because they never served a notice. So the second guy would be qualified as a first applicant, right, under the first effective approach. The FDA rejects this test and says this test is not consistent with the definition I just showed, because the definition I just showed says the when prong doesn't require a notice. It simply says on the first day, a substantially complete ANDA is submitted with a P4 certification. When that's done, that date's fixed. Okay? When that date is fixed, and FDA is saying the problem with this approach, the first effective approach, is the date isn't fixed, right? Somebody submits an ANDA with a P4 certification, doesn't send a notice, they don't qualify, the next guy does everything, submits a P4 certification, sends a notice, now the first filer date became this date instead of this date. And FDA didn't want a fluid date, and says the statute itself that says there's a fixed date, the first date. So with that in mind, the FDA approach adopts the first submitted approach. I think you guys can guess what's going on here. The first submitted approach is, FDA says the when prong is that first date. Once you submit that P4 certification, and it's a substantially complete ANDA, that's your day. If you don't submit an ANDA on that day, you're not a first applicant, okay? As simple as that, which is a big switch from what FDA had been saying up until 6 months ago or 7 months ago, right? So it came as a surprise to many in the industry here. And so with that in mind, the facts of this case plays out on its own, right? The FDA says the first applicant that submitted, even though did not serve a notice, is my first applicant. Now, they don't get 180-day exclusivity because they never perfected the notice, they withdrew their ANDA. Okay, so they don't get it. But the next guy certainly doesn't get it because they didn't submit it on the first day. End of story, end of inquiry, right, as far as the FDA is concerned. So all sounds great, right? Teva sees the Suboxone decision and says, wait a minute, this impacts my other product, Restasis, right? I'm gonna skip this part. Just in the interest of time, and I'm going to go straight to the Teva case. Okay, a lot of information, probably a bad slide here. So I'll go to this one. So this is the Teva timeline. We're moving on to a different case, right? And Teva sees the FDA's decision, the letter decision in July 2018 in the Suboxone case, and knows that if that decision stands, and if FDA's interpretation is correct, they stand to lose what they thought was their first filer exclusivity in the Restasis case. Okay, so I'm going to analyze the facts for you guys pretty quickly. What happens first is Teva submits an ANDA application in January 2012. It's not a P4 certification. There was only one listed patent. Let's call it patent A, because the number doesn't matter. Teva submits a P3 certification to that patent. So there's no first filer question so far, right? What happens next is Teva gets into a back and forth with the FDA because the FDA hasn't given them an acceptance for filing. And then in a few months later, I guess a year later, FDA issues draft guidance. Sorry, my voice is going in and out here. But FDA issues draft guidance on what's necessary to be bioequivalent to the branded product. Okay? And after that draft guidance, the FDA reviews Teva's ANDA again and says, well, the way you've shown bioequivalent is different than our draft guidance. Therefore, we're actually going to refuse to receive your ANDA, meaning they didn't get acceptance for filing. The FDA refused to receive. And Teva says, wait a minute, there's so many things wrong with your decision, right? First of all, the stuff you say is missing from our ANDA is not missing, and they pointed out exactly where it was in the initial submission. Second, they say that's not how draft guidance works. By draft guidance, you're showing us one way we can show bioequivalence. to the branded product. It's not the only way. We're certainly allowed to present a different way, and you need to review my application thoroughly at a later stage. Right now, you just need to check to see if it's facially sufficient. If it is, you got to give me an acceptance for filing. Okay? FDA eventually comes around, actually admits his mistake and says, you know what, you're right. We're going to rescind the refuse to receive. We're going to give you an acceptance for filing, and your application was actually substantially complete as of the first day you filed it. So far, so good, right? But what happens in the middle is while Teva was having this back and forth with the FDA, and before they received this acceptance for filing, what happens is there's another patent that Teva was monitoring that gets issued. And Teva knows that any day, this patent is going to be listed in the Orange Book for the branded product, meaning Teva will have to decide what certification to file to this patent. Okay? So when that's happening, the patent gets listed in the Orange Book. Teva doesn't yet have acceptance for filing, right? So Teva nonetheless amends its ANDA to include a P4 certification to what we will call Patent B, the second patent, okay? So they include a P4 certification on the day it's listed in the Orange Book. So nobody could have done it earlier. Others could have done it on the same day with respect to that patent, but nobody could have done it earlier. Seems easy enough, right? Teva is first filer. I mean, they did it on the day it was listed. There's one more wrinkle that the FDA kind of blindsided Teva. I don't have time to get into the whole story, and I'm certainly not sympathetic to Teva. But the point is, they blindsided Teva in that there was another, right before this patent got listed, there was another applicant who had P4 certified to the patent A. The patent A being the one Teva P3 certified to. That applicant had P4 certified to that patent, again, before Teva had P4 certified to patent B, right? And when they P4 certified to this earlier patent, they had the same issue Teva did, in that FDA took forever giving them acceptance for filing, right? So by the time the FDA came around and said, yes, your ANDA is acceptable for filing, what happens is the patent expires. Patent A expires. So there's no reason for the second applicant to now send, it's not on the second applicant, the other applicant, to send a notice, right? Because the patent's expired. Even if it was the first applicant, it's forfeited that exclusivity. So Teva is now concerned, saying, we don't even know about this. Because they didn't send notice, if you kind of follow the Suboxone decision, and if the FDA wants to be consistent, the FDA has to say that that applicant who P4 certified to patent A is my first filer. Teva obviously P4 certified on a different day. Teva is no longer a first filer. So Teva had to sue the FDA and says, you know, if your Suboxone decision stands, there's so many things wrong with it. We relied on your earlier cases and your earlier decisions and so on. I don't have time to get into the nuances, except if you're interested in this topic, I encourage you to follow this. We don't have a result yet. The case is pending. A lot of other companies have interfered. Obviously, you can guess what their interest is. If you're a second filer, you don't want Teva to keep their exclusivity, because then you can enter on day one with Teva. So Mylan, Teva, and other companies have interfered with the case. The case is ongoing. Maybe 12 months from now, we'll have an answer to this case. But thank you for your time, and I certainly welcome questions afterwards.